Have you ever felt alone, battling the storms of life without knowing where to go? Just like you, Elijah faced tough times and questioned his purpose. Get to know the inspiring story of the prophet Elijah, an ordinary man who became God's voice in the midst of darkness. Discover how he overcame great challenges and found strength in faith, showing that even in the darkest moments, there is hope and redemption. Come connect with Elijah's journey and find inspiration to conquer your own battles. Imagine a time long ago, almost 3,000 years back, in a land full of mountains, deserts, and bustling cities. It was the 9th century BC, and the northern kingdom of Israel was ruled by a king named Ahab. Ahab was a powerful king, but his biggest weakness was his wife, Jezebel. Jezebel was a foreign princess who worshipped pagan gods and brought idolatry to Israel. Together, Ahab and Jezebel built altars and temples for Baal, a false god, and encouraged the people to worship him, turning away from the true God of Israel. In the midst of this chaos and idolatry, a powerful and fearless figure emerged, Elijah. Elijah was a prophet of God, a man chosen to bring God's message to the people. He was from Tishbe, a small village east of the Jordan River, a peaceful place where he probably learned to live simply and rely on God's provision. Elijah wasn't just any man. He had a clear mission and a heart full of courage. His first major appearance in the Bible is marked by a bold and frightening prophecy. He announced to Ahab that there would be a great drought in Israel, one that would last for years. Picture the scene, Elijah all alone, standing before the king and his court, delivering this harsh message. He knew it wouldn't go over well, but he trusted God completely. The drought was devastating. The Jordan River, the crops, the wells, everything dried up. The people suffered, the animals died of thirst, and hunger spread throughout the kingdom. This drought wasn't just a natural disaster, it was a clear sign from God, a direct response to Ahab and Jezebel's idolatry. Baal, the false god they worshipped, was supposed to control the weather and fertility. The drought showed that Baal had no power and that the God of Israel was the only true Lord of all things. During this time, God instructed Elijah to hide near a brook called Chariot, east of the Jordan. And there, something incredible happened. Elijah was fed by ravens. These birds brought him bread and meat, and he drank from the brook. When the brook dried up, God sent Elijah to Zarephath, a pagan city, where he would be taken care of by a poor widow. Despite having very little, the widow and her son never ran out of food, as God made sure the little oil and flour they had never ran out during the drought. Through Elijah, God was showing the people of Israel that he is the provider and that even in times of great need, he doesn't abandon those who trust in him. Elijah was a living example of faith and obedience. He faced kings, fled to the wilderness, trusted ravens and a widow for his sustenance, all without ever wavering in his trust in God. Elijah's story teaches us that no matter how powerful or numerous our enemies may be, if we're on God's side, we're never alone. Elijah, with his unwavering faith and courage, is an inspiration to us all, showing that true strength comes from fully trusting in the Lord, even in the hardest times. Elijah, a mysterious and powerful figure, appears in the scriptures like a lightning bolt in the darkness. Although the Bible doesn't provide many details about his childhood or family, we know he came from Tishbe, a small village east of the Jordan River. Tishbe was a quiet village, with simple stone and mud houses, surrounded by hills and valleys. The inhabitants were shepherds and farmers who lived off the land, and Elijah probably grew up valuing simplicity and relying on God for sustenance. Without many details about his family, we can imagine that Elijah was raised with strong values and a deep faith, perhaps inspired by stories of Israel's great heroes. Life in Tishbe, with its solitude and vastness, would have been his spiritual training ground, where he learned to hear God's voice in the silence, spending hours in prayer and meditation. When Elijah stood before King Ahab, he brought with him the strength of someone who knew the power of God intimately. His humble origins in Tishbe prepared him to confront idolatry and corruption in the northern kingdom of Israel. Elijah shows us that God can raise great leaders from anywhere, regardless of their origins. Elijah, the prophet from Tishbe, became a giant of faith, fighting against idolatry and injustice, and his legacy continues to inspire generations. His story is a journey of faith, courage, and obedience, challenging us to trust God and be faithful in our own journeys. The ministry of Elijah, the fearless prophet of God, is richly documented in the books of 1 Kings and 2 Kings. His journey begins with a profound impact, the prophecy of a great drought in Israel. Imagine a scenario where the usually generous blue sky suddenly turns into a bronze roof, withholding a single drop of water from the thirsty land. That was the grim scenario Elijah foretold. Elijah appeared suddenly, like an unexpected messenger from God, before King Ahab. With a steady gaze and a voice that echoed with divine authority, Elijah declared, "As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word." 1 Kings 17 verse 1. These words fell like a hammer on Ahab and the entire kingdom. Such a severe drought meant failed crops, drying rivers, dying cattle, and devastating hunger. The drought started showing its ugly side. The green fields withered, the rivers and streams turned into cracked, dry beds, and the people of Israel began to feel the pinch of hunger. King Ahab, furious, saw Elijah's prophecy come true and blamed the prophet for all his troubles. But Elijah wasn't a guy to buckle under pressure. He knew his mission was far greater than pleasing earthly kings. He served the King of Heaven. God, in his providence, didn't abandon his faithful servant. He instructed Elijah to retreat to the brook of Chariot, a small tributary of the Jordan. There in the wild, Elijah found refuge. And then one of the Bible's most fascinating miracles happened. Ravens, birds usually associated with death and desolation, brought Elijah bread and meat twice a day. The brook of Chariot provided the necessary water for his survival. Even in the midst of drought, God showed that he is the provider, capable of sustaining his prophet in any circumstance. When the brook finally dried up due to the relentless drought, God instructed Elijah to go to Zarephath, a city outside of Israel. There, he met a poor widow who was about to prepare her last meal with the little flour and oil she had. Elijah asked her to first make a bread for him, promising that the God of Israel would not let her provision run out until the rain returned. The woman, in an act of faith, obeyed. And so, throughout the drought, the flour and oil never ran out, proving once again God's faithfulness. Elijah's story doesn't stop there. In Zarephath, the widow's son fell gravely ill and died. The woman, distraught, blamed Elijah for the tragedy. Elijah, moved by compassion and God's power, took the boy in his arms, carried him to the upper room, laid him on his bed, and cried out to the Lord. God heard Elijah's prayer, and the boy came back to life, demonstrating God's power over death and further strengthening the widow's faith and the faith of everyone who heard about the miracle. Elijah's ministry is a rich tapestry of unshakable faith, astounding miracles, and bold confrontations with idolatry and injustice. His story begins with the prophecy of a devastating drought, but is filled with moments that reveal God's sovereignty and mercy. Elijah shows us that, even in the most difficult circumstances, God is present and capable of doing the impossible. His life is a call for all of us to trust in God and be courageous in our faith. At the peak of Elijah's ministry, we witness one of the most dramatic and electrifying showdowns in biblical history. The setting is Mount Carmel, a majestic mountain rising above Israel's landscape, becoming a spiritual battleground between the true God of Israel and the false gods of Baal. The worship of Baal, a pagan god, had spread like a plague throughout the northern kingdom of Israel. King Ahab, influenced by his wife Jezebel, had built altars and temples dedicated to Baal, leading the people of Israel astray from the Lord. With unshakable courage and fervent faith, Elijah decided to confront this idolatry once and for all. Elijah summoned King Ahab, the prophets of Baal, and all the people of Israel to Mount Carmel for a decisive challenge. Imagine the tension in the air as thousands of people climbed the mountain, curious and anxious to see what would happen. The sun blazed brightly, reflecting the fervor and anticipation in the hearts of everyone present. At the top of Mount Carmel, Elijah stood and made a bold proposal. How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal is God, follow him. The challenge was clear and direct. Elijah proposed that 2 altars be prepared, one for Baal and one for the Lord. The prophets of Baal would sacrifice a bull, and Elijah would sacrifice another, but no one would set fire to the altars. The true God would reveal himself by sending fire from heaven to consume the sacrifice. The prophets of Baal, about 450 men, started first. From morning till noon, they fervently called on Baal, dancing around the altar and cutting themselves with knives in a desperate frenzy. But there was no answer. No sound, no fire, just the silence of the heavens. Elijah, with calm confidence, mocked them, suggesting that perhaps Baal was busy, sleeping or traveling. In the afternoon, Elijah called the people close to his altar. He repaired the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down, using 12 stones to represent the 12 tribes of Israel. He then dug a trench around the altar and ordered that water be poured over the sacrifice and the wood until the trench was filled with water, making it humanly impossible for any fire to ignite. Elijah then stepped forward and prayed fervently, "O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." Suddenly, the sky lit up with fire that came down and consumed the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the soil, and even the water in the trench. The people fell to their knees, proclaiming, "The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God." Elijah's victory was complete. The prophets of Baal were defeated and killed, and the power of the true God was revealed unmistakably. This event wasn't just a demonstration of power, it was a call to repentance and renewal of faith in God. Elijah showed that the Lord is the one true God, capable of answering with fire from heaven and transforming hearts. Mount Carmel became a monument of faith, a place where God's truth shone brightly, and idolatry was defeated. Elijah's story on Mount Carmel teaches us the importance of standing firm in our faith, even in the face of opposition and doubt. It reminds us that God is powerful enough to answer our prayers and sustain us during challenging times. Above all, it inspires us to trust in God, knowing that He is faithful and true, always ready to reveal His power and love in our lives. During the severe drought that struck Israel, Elijah experienced God's miraculous provision in extraordinary ways. After announcing to King Ahab that there would be no rain, Elijah hid as God commanded, going to the brook of Chariot, east of the Jordan. There, in the wilderness, began a period of trial and absolute trust in divine faithfulness. Imagine the scene: Elijah alone, listening to the gentle sound of the flowing water and the birds singing. He had only the brook to drink from. But God, in His infinite wisdom, didn't leave Elijah stranded. In a display of supernatural care, God sent ravens to bring Elijah bread and meat twice a day. These birds, usually associated with arid and desolate places, became messengers of divine provision. Every day, morning and evening, they brought the necessary sustenance for the prophet. Elijah didn't need to worry because the Lord was taking care of all his needs. However, the drought worsened, and the brook of Cherith eventually dried up. That's when God spoke to Elijah again, directing him to go to Zarephath, a Gentile city outside of Israel. Elijah obeyed without question, demonstrating his unwavering trust in God's plan. Upon arriving in Zarephath, Elijah met a poor widow gathering sticks to prepare the last meal for herself and her son. With courage and faith, Elijah asked her for a little water and a piece of bread. The woman, though hesitant, explained that she only had a handful of flour and a bit of oil, just enough for one last meal before they would starve. Elijah, with a confidence that could only come from God, told her, "Don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said. But first, make a small loaf of bread for me and bring it to me, and then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says: the jar of flour will not be used up and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land." The widow, in a remarkable act of faith, obeyed. And so day after day, the flour and oil multiplied miraculously. Every morning, when the widow opened the jar of flour and the jug of oil, she found enough to sustain herself, her son, and Elijah. God had promised, and He delivered in a spectacular way. The widow's house, which seemed destined for hunger and despair, became a place of abundant provision and renewed hope. But the trials weren't over yet. The widow's son fell gravely ill and died. In her grief, the woman questioned Elijah, blaming him for the tragedy. Deeply moved, Elijah took the boy and carried him to the upper room where he was staying. He laid the boy's body on his bed and cried out to the Lord with all his heart, "O Lord my God, have you brought tragedy even upon this widow I am staying with by causing her son to die?" Elijah stretched himself out on the boy 3 times and cried to the Lord, "O Lord my God, let this boy's life return to him." God heard Elijah's fervent prayer, and the boy's life returned. Elijah brought the revived child back to his mother, saying, "Look, your son is alive." The woman, now filled with unshakable faith, responded, "Now I know that you are a man of God and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth." The story of Elijah at Chariot and Zarephath is a powerful testimony of God's miraculous provision and the importance of unshakable faith. Even in the most desperate circumstances, God showed that He can sustain, protect, and bring life where there seemed to be only death. This period in Elijah's life teaches us that by fully trusting in God, we can experience His wonders and provisions, even in times of great difficulty. During the severe drought in Zarephath, the widow who sheltered Elijah faced a new tragedy, the death of her only son. Desperate, she accused Elijah of bringing misfortune to her home. Feeling the pain and weight of the situation, Elijah took the boy's body to his room and prayed fervently to the Lord, asking for the child's life to be restored. With unshakable faith, Elijah stretched out over the boy 3 times, crying out to God to bring him back to life. God answered the prophet's plea, and the boy began to breathe again. Elijah brought the resurrected child back to his mother, who, full of gratitude, acknowledged the truth of Elijah's words and his status as a true prophet of God. This miracle not only saved the boy but also strengthened the widow's faith and confirmed Elijah's calling as God's messenger. The story highlights that even in the midst of pain and despair, God can perform miracles and demonstrate His power and care. In the northern kingdom of Israel, things were getting darker. King Ahab and his wife, Queen Jezebel, were leading the country down a dangerous and dark path. They had brought a new form of worship to Israel, one that was completely opposed to the God of Israel. Ahab, married to Jezebel, a devout worshipper of Baal, allowed the worship of Baal to spread throughout the kingdom and even built a temple dedicated to this pagan god in Samaria. Jezebel, determined and ruthless, was responsible for forcing the worship of Baal, persecuting and killing the Lord's prophets. The kingdom was plunged into idolatry, and many of the Israelites began to worship Baal and follow pagan ways. In the midst of this spiritual darkness, Elijah stood as the only voice still proclaiming God's truth and calling the people to repentance. Imagine the scene. The country was full of temples to Baal, and the people were deep into practices that went against God's laws and will. But while many drifted away, Elijah stayed strong in his mission. With guts and determination, he kept speaking out against idolatry and challenging the kingdom's leaders. Elijah didn't back down from threats and persecution. He knew his mission was crucial for Israel's spiritual restoration. So he went to King Ahab and boldly declared, "As surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word." This prophecy was a direct challenge to Baal's power, the storm and fertility god supposedly in control of the rain and crops. As the country faced drought and famine, Elijah continued to be a prophetic voice, keeping God's truth alive. He not only called out Baal worship but also offered solutions and a way back to the Lord. His courage was a powerful testimony of faith in the face of adversity. Elijah also called the people to a showdown on Mount Carmel, where he challenged the prophets of Baal to a decisive test. He knew this would be a chance to show the people that the Lord, the God of Israel, was the true God, and that Baal was a powerless idol. By calling everyone to Mount Carmel, Elijah laid out a clear challenge. 2 altars would be prepared, one for Baal and one for the Lord. The true God would be the one who answered with fire from heaven to consume the sacrifice. On Mount Carmel, the scene was epic. The prophets of Baal called on their God in every way they could think of, but nothing happened. In contrast, Elijah set up the Lord's altar, poured water on it to show it was thoroughly soaked, and then prayed to the God of Israel. Immediately, fire came down from heaven and consumed the sacrifice, the altar, and even the water around it, spectacularly proving that the Lord is the true God. This powerful event not only exposed the fraud of Baal worship, but also led the people of Israel to acknowledge God's greatness and power. After the showdown, Elijah ordered the prophets of Baal to be captured and executed, restoring justice and truth in Israel. Despite the challenges and threats from Jezebel and Ahab, Elijah remained a faithful spokesperson for God. He not only denounced idolatry but also demonstrated through miracles and courage that the Lord is the true God. Elijah was a beacon in the spiritual darkness, keeping the hope and truth of the God of Israel alive. After Elijah's victory over the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, Queen Jezebel, furious, threatened to kill him. Fearing for his life, Elijah fled into the wilderness and arrived at Mount Horeb, a sacred place where God had revealed himself to Moses. Exhausted and discouraged, Elijah found refuge in a cave on the mountain. There God manifested himself not in grand spectacles, but in a gentle whisper, showing that he is present even in moments of calm. God renewed Elijah's mission, revealing to him that there were 7,000 Israelites who had not bowed to Baal. Most importantly, God instructed Elijah to anoint Elisha as his successor. This choice was crucial for ensuring the continuity of the prophetic ministry. Elijah followed these instructions, found Elisha in the field, and passed his mantle to him, symbolizing the transfer of authority. Elisha accepted the call and prepared to continue Elijah's work. Thus, Elijah left Mount Horeb with a renewed perspective and a successor ready to lead, demonstrating that God continues to work even in times of crisis and despair. Elijah, the courageous prophet, confronted King Ahab and Queen Jezebel, who had introduced idolatry into Israel and persecuted God's prophets. In a crucial moment, Elijah declared divine judgment upon them. He prophesied that Ahab and Jezebel would meet dishonorable deaths and that Ahab's dynasty would be destroyed. The prophecy reflected God's judgment on the prevailing corruption and injustice. Elijah foretold that Ahab would die violently and that Jezebel would be devoured by dogs, a fate symbolizing utter disgrace. Although Ahab tried to show remorse, the prophecy was fulfilled with his death in battle and Jezebel's disgraceful end, with her remains being eaten by dogs. Ahab's dynasty also fell, confirming Elijah's words and divine justice. The story illustrates God's faithfulness and the certainty that his justice prevails, even against the most powerful rulers. As Elijah's life and ministry neared their end, an extraordinary event was about to unfold. The prophet, who had faced kings and challenged false gods with unwavering faith, was about to experience one of the most impressive divine manifestations described in the Bible. Elijah and his disciple Elisha were traveling together from city to city on a final journey before Elijah's departure. They had visited Gilgal, Bethel, and Jericho, and now they were approaching the Jordan River. Their journey was marked by a series of miraculous events that demonstrated God's presence and power with Elijah. When they reached the Jordan, Elijah took his cloak and, in a symbolic gesture, struck the water. Immediately, the waters parted, creating a dry path for them to cross. This miracle not only showcased God's power but also signaled that something extraordinary was about to happen. After they crossed the Jordan, Elijah turned to Elisha and asked if there was anything he could do for him before being taken away. With great courage and faith, Elisha asked for a double portion of his master's spirit. This request wasn't just a desire for power but a reflection of his deep respect and his wish to continue Elijah's ministry with the same fervor. Elijah replied that if Elisha saw the moment he was taken up to heaven, his request would be granted. They continued their journey, and then the glorious and spectacular moment marking the end of Elijah's ministry arrived. Suddenly, a whirlwind appeared in the sky. It was a majestic and supernatural phenomenon, a clear sign of God's presence. Amid this whirlwind, a chariot of fire, drawn by horses of fire, appeared, descending from heaven. The chariot of fire represented God's glory and majesty, filling the sky with an intense and vibrant light. As Elijah and Elisha watched, the whirlwind enveloped Elijah, and he was taken up to heaven in a glorious ascension. It was a moment of indescribable beauty and power, a clear sign that Elijah was being taken directly into God's presence. The vision was so magnificent that Elisha, watching intently, witnessed the divine act's majesty and understood its profound significance. After Elijah's ascension, Elisha picked up the cloak Elijah had dropped. This cloak symbolized the transfer of authority and the prophetic legacy. With the cloak in hand, Elisha prepared to take on the role of Israel's prophet, carrying the spirit and power that Elijah had left for him. Elisha's return to the Jordan was marked by a significant act. He struck the river's waters with Elijah's cloak, and just as before, the waters parted, opening a dry path. This act was a testament that Elijah's spirit and power were now with Elisha, and that the prophet's ministry had been passed on with the same authority and power. Thus, Elijah's ministry ended in a glorious and unforgettable way, and Elisha, now his successor, began his own journey as God's prophet. Elijah's ascension to heaven in a whirlwind, accompanied by a chariot of fire, not only marked the end of an era but also the beginning of a new phase in God's divine plan for the people of Israel. It's a story filled with power and mystery, showcasing God's greatness and the continuity of His work on earth. If you enjoyed this story, click on the video on your screen to watch the story of another prophet that's just as enriching as Elijah's.